last week when Devontae wasn't there, Joseph Nada got the first opportunity. I think, they want to rotate that, or at least I would want to rotate that. And some of these younger receivers, maybe churn them through and get reps and see who starts to stand out.
Welcome in, everybody, a Thursday edition of Birds 365. It is OTA day. Johnny Mac scheduled to go down for OTAs today. So an exciting day in Eagle Land. We'll have some look at the players, some videos will come out. We'll post them up later on JAKIB Sports here on the YouTube channel. So make sure you are subscribed and liking the video so you can help our channel grow and reach more Eagles fans. Johnny Mac, good Thursday morning to you, sir. Good Thursday morning to all of our streamers and on the chat box. John, how you doing this morning?
Doing well, yeah. Happy OTA 2 day. I'm calling it second last OTA, maybe the last ever OTA in Philadelphia
maybe
history. Who knows?
By the way, we never talked about that. What did you think of that? By the way,
yeah, I don't like it. We talked about it a little bit yesterday.
Yeah, just we had some guests on, so I didn't know if you wanted to expand on it.
Yeah, I think the calendar is a big thing. When it comes to the NFL, it's one thing that. Well, I criticize the league for a lot of things. That's not one of them. They do a good job setting up the calendar to the point they're always in the forefront of people's minds. And I think OTAs is a part of that and getting people out in the spring. And you go on X or Twitter, your favorite social media platform, wherever you go, you see it all over the country, not only Philadelphia. You see the clips of, the younger players getting involved. You see them for the first time. And I think it's an important part of the process for them too, in a preparation standpoint. Not so much for the older players, and that's why it is voluntary. So it depends how it looks. If it's going to be mandatory, I think the players are going to hate it, especially the veteran players. If it's similar in the early stages of a longer ramp up period to training camp, which is what the Players Association is trying to push, if that part's voluntary, maybe it doesn't change much and everybody's agreeable. I do know if the NFL gets 18 games, which is what they want, that's basically been the negotiation policy is, all right, if you give us an extra game, you can have whatever you want in the offseason. We don't care. So if it remains voluntary, I think they can push it through. If it's mandatory, though, I think there might be some problems because, guys take vacations. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are guys that are well paid. They're professionals, and they take a downtime too.
Yeah, and a lot of older players have families. And remember, from basically, training camp through the Super Bowl, for that particular team. But if you're a playoff team like the Eagles have been, it's a grind, man. And I can tell you from covering this league for a long time, it's a grind for us. It's constant,
absolutely. It's
constant. It's constant for a long period of time. And your family takes a hit in that time. You think about holidays. Now there's games on Christmas, on Wednesday, and then Thanksgiving. And that ability to handle things, and I think it was Albert Breer brought up a good point. At least now, guys who have kids get to be with their kids for that little downtime. If you push it back, it's not going to be the case as much. You're going to have off time in April and May when they still have when they're still in school and that type of thing. So vacations become a little bit more difficult. I mean, these are all entitled problems, obviously.
Yeah,
we're talking about, but that's defaulted. I don't like it. Again, the major part for me that I don't like is the calendar standpoint. I like when it's spread out a little bit, and I think that contributes to the popularity of the league. I'm not going to say it's going to take a significant hit, but for a couple weeks, couple months, it'll take a hit. because there won't be as much going on.
Yeah, I think they'll still manage it better. But shout out to James. Let's get to our chat real quick. Shout out to James, Mike, SMD Eagles, Ian East, Charles. We appreciate everybody for being here this morning. Make sure you drop a like. But our winning chatter this morning so far is James Dowgan. First, he asked, what's the benefit from the league's perspective of removing spring OTAs? But he also hit us with, woke up confident in the Birds, put $100 on them to win the Super Bowl. There you go, James. Incite some positivity and some optimism on this team going into the year. But good question on the OTAs. What would be the benefit from the league's perspective, Johnny Mac?
I don't think there is much of a benefit from the league's perspective other than getting that 18th game. I think that's the negotiating ploy. They don't want to move it, the league. They don't want to change the offseason system. The coaches certainly don't want to change it. But they didn't want to change it from the prior system. They always want to practice. They always want to get their hands on the players as quickly as possible, especially the younger players, and this will push that back. So from the league's perspective, it's strictly about that 18th game, but they want that 18th game, would prefer to keep the status quo, but obviously that's unlikely to happen. And the tradition has been for the Players Association to push for this off-season stuff and eliminate spring work for whatever reason. Again, as they educate the players, to me, the big point is whether this proposed ramp-up period, longer ramp-up period, which would start in June or early July, is that going to be mandatory? If it's going to be mandatory,
yeah, players are going to try and nix that.
Yeah, I think you're going to see some pushback from the rank and file. If it's voluntary for the veterans, and again, voluntary, I always put that in quotes. OTAs are voluntary for very, very few players on each team that have the kind of cachet to walk in and walk out and be there and not be there. Most players, if you're fighting for a job, it might say voluntary, but you better show up because
Yep.
you know, if you're fighting for a job and you're not out there, that's gonna be a negative check mark. And obviously, you never hear about young players skipping OTAs because they need them, and they know that, and that's part of it as well. Now, there's always the exception if somebody has a situation that they have to take care of. Obviously, there's exceptions, but you can't go shopping for sconces if you're a rookie or a first year player or a younger player even.
Yeah, speaking of that, by the way, Keely Ringo, that's why everybody was talking about him missing that first OTA. But I did see him in the video that the Eagles posted out. They did
Yeah, he's been there.
Yeah, so but that's good to know because I think not everybody knows he was there. So he has been at team stuff. I'm assuming he'll be out there today when Johnny Mac goes out there. John, do you think they would consider a second bye week if they do get that extra game?
Yeah, I think that'll be a part of it.
That'll be a part of it, right?
Yeah, second bye week. I think that'll be a part of it as well. And they're going to go to 18 games eventually. It's just a matter of when they get there. The 17 game is goofy from just the stature of it and the extra game and the weird. You got one extra home game every other year. It's kind of weird.
The thing I like about the 17 games is nobody finishes 8-8. You're either above 500 or you're under 500. Or I guess you could tie a game and end up 500. But I do like that aspect of it.
Yeah, but for years, you talk about 16 games, and I like even when Vic was explaining how important each NFL game was, he made the comparison to baseball and said you gotta put the caveat on it now and say, well, when we used to play 16, that was essentially worth 10 baseball games. Now it's 17. It creates all the math problems. And if you lose 2 games, he said, it's basically like losing 20 in a row. That's how important it is, each game in the NFL. And I thought it was a nice little teaching point for people. But now because it's 17 games, you have to put that caveat on it. So 17 is hinky and weird and ugly. But the goal has always been to get to 18. Always. always.
Johnny Mac, let's move in our OTAs. You're getting out there today. Second OTA available to the media, so you will be down there. First, before I ask you what you're thinking about heading down there and the questions that we have going into this OTA, what's the schedule like? I know, is it same time as last week? You'll be down there around 12:45?
12:50. So that's when they're scheduled to be on the field and ready to go. It'll be a green practice, as the Eagles like to call them, so a full go, as much as a full go can be in the off season. So probably same as last week, 70 minutes or so, somewhere in that range. They do have a little bit of a developmental period, as they always do after practice as well. That's usually about 10 minutes for the younger players and the four stringers at this time of year who barely get reps in the regular practice. They get to kind of show off in that developmental period. But yeah, it'll be very similar to last week. So some of the questions, I mean, you brought up one of them. Want to see Kelly Ringo back on the field? Expect him to be back on the field, and how that impacts the depth chart at cornerback, because I think a lot of people were excited about Isaiah Rodgers last week, but there was a lot of context to why he was out there with the first team that I think people don't realize. One, Bradbury's not going to be there. He's got a charity thing in Birmingham that's been set up for a while, and not that he would be there anyways, voluntary in the situation he's in. So, he's not going to be there. But last week, as you mentioned, Ringo wasn't there, but he has been at the facility. So that's one of those examples. He probably had to take care of something in his personal life. And Eli Ricks was at practice, but he tweaked something, was in the injury tent for a short period. Now, it wasn't serious, and you can tell that because he stayed on the field and he watched the rest of the practice. If there's any thought it's serious, they're going to take him inside and get him checked, and they don't want him outside on the field. So he might be back, and that creates obviously a lot more depth at outside corner. Last week it was Darius Slay, and who knows if Darius is going to be there. As he mentioned, he's a family man. Maybe his daughter's running track. Who knows? So guys will be in and out, veteran guys. So it all depends on who's going to be there. But if Slay's going to be there, and Ringo's going to be there, and Ricks is going to be there, and Rodgers is going to be there, it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. And you still want to get Quinyon Mitchell, obviously, reps with the second team, and Cooper DeJean with the second team as well. A lot of bodies at cornerback.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things you're going to start to see with patterns. You go to one practice, it's like, okay, he was here, but are they thinking that's permanent? Do they like him there? Are they just moving him around? So I am curious to see how the depth chart will change a little bit today, especially if guys are coming back like Keely Ringo. And then the wide receiver thing, I'd like to see Devontae out there just because I want to know. I want to know how that position breaks down. And then I also think they're going to line up those guys in the slot a lot. I know I read a piece from Dave Zangaro in NBC Sports Philadelphia talking about AJ was lining up in the slot a lot. And you'll probably see more of that with Kellen Moore's offense. So that'll be good to see too. Any other things that Johnny Mac is looking for as you get ready to head down there today?
Yeah, I mean, Nakobe's a big story as well.
Yeah.
On the defensive side of the football. Now, and this is just my speculation. I don't know why the Eagles would push him on the field, other than for PR purposes at this stage. So my guess is, and they're not going to give a two shits about that. So, and I know a lot of people want to see him, and there's that weird. He's always hurt, and he's hurt again. He's not hurt again. It's the same injury, rehabbing, coming back. And that's what I talk about from the PR standpoint. That's not worth satiating those people who don't understand anyway. So the Eagles can't run their organization by that kind of thing. And I don't know why you would want to push him, and that just gives Devin White more of an opportunity to lock down the middle linebacker job. It gives Zach Bond more of an opportunity to prove what Vic Fangio said, that he can play off-ball linebacker. And nothing he's seen to this point says he can't play off-ball linebacker. And Jeremiah Trotter, how quickly do some of these rookies get, how quickly does Mitchell get first team reps? How quickly does DeJean get second team reps at outside corner? How quickly does Trotter get off the third team? How quickly does Trevor Keegan get off the third team? A bunch of these rookies, and Anaya Smith, it's sort of in the same boat as N'Kobe, in that I don't know why you would push him. He's coming off the stress fracture they discovered at the combine. And I know everybody'd like to see him, but why are you going to push it at this stage would be my take and my path. But it's always interesting to see when they start giving the rookies a little bit more. And it might be here, it might be mini camp, it might not be the training camp.
Yeah, minicamp's coming right up, so it'll be good to see that too. Do you guys have full availability on minicamp?
Yeah, mini camps open every day, every practice every day. So June 4th through June 6th. Now a lot of teams in the past have have canceled that final day. So, don't think it's going to be there. The Eagles haven't had one in so long. We don't know how they're going to handle it. But a lot of teams around the league tend to cancel that final day, last day of school, so to speak, maybe have a outing. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens with the Eagles as well.
Yeah, so good start to our show today. We have good show planned today. Coming up in hour number 2, we have Les Bowen, and then in hour number 1, it'll just be Johnny Mack and I breaking down what we're going in, what we'll see, what we're looking for going into OTAs. We have a couple things we'll do with the roster, with the NFC quarterback ranks. I want to run by Johnny Mack, and then if any of you have good questions for Johnny Mack on what you want him to look for today, or just a question for Johnny Mack, please drop it in the chat. And if it's good enough, I will read it to Johnny Mack later on in hour number 1. So good stuff there. Anybody who drops a super chat, obviously, will jump right to the front. So we appreciate that. John, one other thing I'm looking for at OTA today, I'll be excited to see some footage from him, from anything I can get, is John Ross, the new wide receiver they signed after Devontae Parker retired. I know it's not a big deal, but we have talked a lot on this show about the need for a backup outside wide receiver. Maybe he can be that guy. Maybe he won't be that guy, but at least we'll have a chance to see him today playing out there, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know what to expect from John Ross. He hasn't played since 2021. He obviously he was not a success, to put it mildly, as a first round pick, as a top 10 pick in Cincinnati. He can run. That's one I also mentioned when I wrote about it for Sports Illustrated. Wide receiver from the position of, look, if Demonte's there and AJ's there, the starting receivers in 11 personnel are going to be AJ, Devontae, and Paris Campbell. Last week when Devontae wasn't there, Joseph Nada got the first opportunity. I think, they want to rotate that, or at least I would want to rotate that, and some of these younger receivers, maybe churn them through and get reps and see who starts to stand out. Jacob Harris was the one who probably had the best practice last week of that group. So to me, then, but again, part of this is they were on the field Tuesday, but we don't get to see it. They're on the field Friday, but we're not going to get to see it. So only one cluster of the OTAs, right, the threes, are open to reporters. So maybe they did that on Tuesday, and maybe it rotates back. We don't know that, but I'd want to look at all of them: Jacob Harris, Shaq Davis, Johnny Wilson, the rookie 6th-round pick. I don't think Anias is going to be back, but we'll see. He's stretched. You never know. If you're ready to go, you're ready to go. Austin Watkins is another one of those young receivers. He didn't practice, so he's banged up with something as well. So maybe he's back. So a lot of guys people don't know that much about. And Joseph Nada didn't seize that opportunity to where he say, all right, let's keep him at the top of the depth chart of that second group. I'd want to rotate those guys. In fact, Jacob Harris, as I said, was far more impressive. So maybe that shows if one of the guys aren't there, maybe that shows with more reps for him.
Yeah, the wide receiver position is interesting. Mr. Perez drops a good comment. The Eagles I did see this. The Eagles were named the best fit for free agent wide receiver Hunter Renfrow. What's your thoughts on this, Xander and John? I don't know. I mean, he's a slot guy, right? He's a true slot receiver. So he's going to be your slot wide receiver. It doesn't really fix your depth on the outside problem. Maybe John Ross can be that, but I don't know. I mean, I think I'd prefer to add depth to that outside room just because I think you will probably see Kellen lining up these star receivers, Devontae and AJ, in the slot at times and moving them all around, especially with the motion and stuff like that. So, John, what do you think of Hunter Renfrow?
Well, you're right. He's a pure slot guy, and I prefer to add somebody outside the numbers as a backup from that perspective. But he's probably better than Paris Campbell, not probably. Now he had 100 reception season back in 2021, and it hasn't been great since then. Only had 25 receptions last year, so how much is left, I don't know. But he is a pure slot receiver. I don't think that's what the Eagles need dramatically because kind of what you said in that AJ and Devontae are so versatile. They can play X, they can play Z, they can play flex, they can play, which is the slot position. They can do all three. A lot of receivers can't do that. And they're outside guys or they're slot guys. They have the luxury of being able to move those players around. And AJ was in the slot, as Dave pointed out. Devontae will be in the slot at times. There's no question about that. So I think the bigger need is a backup outside receiver than a slot guy. But at the same time, Renfrow to me is a far better slot receiver than Paris Campbell. So, if you want to go about it that way and say, well, we just want a better slot receiver.
Right.
But money factors into it as well. Paris is playing for $1.3 million a year. He looked pretty good last week in the first practice too. So I'm not sure the Eagles are going to cut bait so quickly on the Paris Campbell path. So yeah, I mean, if you just look at it as they need a receiver, and Renfro's been a pretty good receiver. That's why you see some of these best bid stories, but they don't factor in slots and roles and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, he would make that slot receiver better, but he doesn't add what they probably need the most to add, which is depth on the outside. And coming up later in hour number 1, Johnny Mac and I are going to do the position groups on the Eagles, strength or weakness. I was asked a question about the wide receivers, and I'm like, strength. We got Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, and Big Sales points out we got 6 wide receivers on the team. Only 2 of them are even competent. So I guess you could argue that could be a problem. Johnny Mac's been talking about the same thing where you need depth out there. So we'll talk about that. John, last thing I'm looking for heading into this OTA is Avonte Maddox and where they play him, because I think he kind of plays a big role in how the cornerback room might fall. If he's lined up at slot, it makes it more competitive for some of the other guys, Isaiah Rodgers, namely, because he's probably battling with Keely Ringo, with Quinyon Mitchell, so I'm watching where Avonte goes, and then if they move him to safety more.
Yeah, well, I think the cross training, and I wrote about that at si.com as well. I think Avante's versatility enables the Eagles, if you're looking down the road, and everything depends on health with Avante, but if he's healthy, nobody questions his ability on the field, and he's still young enough to where you're, um, there's not going to be a downturn from that perspective. So everything's health related, but I think a lot of people look at safety and say, well, you only have CJ, Reed Blankenship, and Sidney Brown when he comes back from his ACL. Then you start to get some questionable, guys. We just talked about the receiver group, and you're into that Jacob Harris, Joseph Nada with Tristan McCullum and Mekhi Gardner, completely unproven players. And people say you got to get an extra safety. Well, Cooper DeJean and Avonte Maddox. And what that enables Howie to do is keep an extra body at cornerback where they have all these cornerbacks.
Right.
And in theory, if you're thinking about it just in a box of, oh, you need a poor safety, you're going to lose one of those outside corners you probably want to keep. But the fact that Avonte can play the position, the fact that Cooper may be able to play the position, enables you to keep an extra one of those cornerbacks. So that might be how he's thinking. And it wouldn't be a bad way to think. I would say that.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. We're going to take our first commercial timeout, 30 minutes into the show here. Coming up in hour number 2 at 9:20, we'll have Les Bowen, longtime Eagles reporter, doing some work now for PHLY Sports and has his own blog, Les Bowen's John. So we'll talk to Les Bowen coming up later on in hour number 2. Coming up next, Eagles position grades. Johnny Mack and I will run through the positions, plus or minus, positive or negative for the Eagles. So we'll do that. I'll tip the hand that the offense looks better than the defense, but we will do that by group. Coming up next on Birds 365, I want to thank everybody for tuning in this morning. We appreciate all of you in the chat, Mike, Malik, SMD, Twiz, Corey, we appreciate you for being here as always. Mr. Prez, thanks everybody for being here. Make sure you like the show to help us grow on JAKIB Sports, and stay tuned. Birds 365 will be right back after the break.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.